Hello there, this is Russ Bucher from ControlMyNikon. In this video, we're going to take a look at how to use the ControlMyNikon image browser to explore and review your captured images. Now by default, you'll see that the image browser area here is embedded right into ControlMyNikon, so it's part of the window. But you can change this. If you go up to the View menu, you can detach it. And now you can move this out to another window if you like. And if you press this little square button here, it is going to toggle between full screen and a smaller view of the image browser. So I'm just going to reattach it to ControlMyNikon. There it is right there. Okay. Now within the image browser, you can see on the left side there's the folder pane where you can navigate to different folders and review images. You have the preview pane that shows the currently selected thumbnail. You have the histogram for the current selected thumbnail, and also the metadata for that same thumbnail. On the bottom of the screen, you'll find the thumb strip that shows all the thumbnails that are currently in the selected folder or search results. Now currently we're on the Z drive and we're in the archive subfolder. If I go up one folder to images, it shows blank as there's no images in there. And if I click on here, it goes back into archive. If you want to add more images to the browser, all you need to do is click on a folder that has images in it and it'll be automatically entered into the browser. Now whenever you click on a folder, any images that are in there are added to the ControlMyNikon database. This database contains a small representation of this large image as a thumbnail, plus a slightly larger one as a preview, and all this histogram data and metadata as well. So anytime you go to a new folder, that information is added to the database. And that comes in handy because it's very easy to search through the database and find any images you might have shot in the past. Even if you go up here and hide the image browser, you can't see, of course, the images that you're capturing, but as you capture them, they're still being added to the database. So if you wanted to use something like Lightroom or Adobe Bridge as your image browser, you could just hide the ControlMyNikon image browser and then capture shots and they'll be displayed in those other browsers. However, the information about each one of those will be added to the database. So you can come back later on, you can still search for those images within ControlMyNikon. So I'm going to bring the browser back up and I'll just click on View and Attached. Now some things that we can do here in the folder pane is we can right click, it brings up a menu, and we can refresh. Normally when you add or remove folders, even outside of ControlMyNikon, this will detect that and it will adjust the view. We can also search. Now when you click on search, it opens up this searching pane. So I'm just going to close it and there it is again. Okay, so let's try searching. So what we can do here in the search is it will search for any of the stored data for these images. So if you have not clicked on a particular folder full of images, search cannot find anything in there because you have never gone there before. So to add those folders of images to ControlMyNikon, all you need to do is click on those folders and it will find it. We could search by date range, and this date range is the date captured. So here it shows up here in the metadata. So you could set a date range, and you can also tell it to search in subfolders. Let's say that I wanted to search for all images that have the word, let's say blooming in it. And here we have one image I could see that has the word blooming. So I'll just type it in. And then you can press search or the enter key on the keyboard. So I'll click on search and it just finds one because there is only one image with that particular information in it. Now you can search for any information associated with this image. That includes the folder name, the file name, the file extension, any of the EXIF metadata, or any of the IPTC metadata. So if you had a bunch of images and maybe you had the city field filled in with the current city that you shot the image in, you could search for that city. Okay, let's clear this. So I'll just click on clear. And you can see it brings back all of the images again, since we no longer have a search term. Well, let's just try a partial search. How about the word bloom? Press enter, and it also found it. So it's really doing a partial search of any of the character data. So if I typed in OOM, it's also going to find this. Okay. So that's how you use a search. And if you want to hide it, you just go up here, right click, and turn off the search. If you'd like to open up a Windows Explorer window for this current folder, you just right click on the folder, then go to Explore. And this takes you to that folder, and then you can click on it and you can see the contents of it. Let's right click on this again and take a look what else we have. So we can also add a folder. And now we have a subfolder. If we wanted to, we could capture images into this folder, and if later on I wanted to delete to this folder, I could do it here. Whenever you delete a folder, or when you delete an image in ControlMyNikon, it's always moved to the recycle bin. We just don't blow it away completely. So you always have a chance to get it back from the recycle bin. So to delete this folder, we're going to click on yes, and the contents of that folder have been sent to the recycle bin. I'm just going to narrow this down a little bit, and as you may have seen on our user interface tutorial video, if you double click on these splitters, they'll hide that particular panel and give you a little bit more room. So if I go back here and double click, it opens it back up again, and you can size these as you need. This one can also be hidden, and this one too, and the bottom one. If you really need a lot of room, you can even hide the main ControlMyNikon window. Let's take a look at the image preview. Now, whenever you select an image on the thumb strip, it will first load in the preview image, and then after several seconds, it will load in the large original image. So if I was to go to this one right here and click on it, you'll see initially it's a bit lower resolution, and then after a couple seconds it looks a little bit better. Let's try another one. It loads, lower resolution, and now the higher resolution image was loaded into it. Let's try this one. Loads, and now higher res. So let's go to this one, and you really see the effect in these wires. Now, at any time when the main image is up, you can bring up the image magnifier. Initially, when you click on a thumbnail and you bring up the image, you can't bring up the magnifier until the large resolution image has loaded. So it takes a couple seconds before you can use the magnifier. So if I was to click on this one here, double click, nothing happens. But now that the complete image is loaded, I can double click and I get my magnifier. Now this is a true digital magnifier in that it uses the actual source data from the large original image. So if I wanted to take a closer look at what looks like a little speck of dust or pollen on the top of this bee here, all I need to do is double click on it and it loads up the magnifier. Now you can also load up the magnifier by right clicking and selecting the toggle magnifier selection here on the menu. So I'll just turn it off that way. Go back here, right click, and toggle the magnifier. And you see here there is different levels of magnification. And you can go right down to the pixel level. But mainly use the magnifier to take a good look at the image and make sure that whatever you want it to be in focus is in focus. When the image browser is attached to the main ControlMyNikon window, you can use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out on your magnifier. So here I'm using the mouse wheel to go in and out. And let's close this. You'll notice that if you go to an image that is in portrait mode, the magnifier will look a little different, and it'll try to keep the aspect ratio of the overall image. Let's try a couple more. So the magnifier is really handy to allow you to explore your captured images. Let's take a look at some of the other options. If we were to right-click, we can also send this to an external editor. So this particular image is a raw file, .nef. So this image will be sent to whatever program you have in your system that is associated with the .nef file extension. And in this case, it's hooked up to Raw Therapy. This is an excellent freeware raw conversion program, and I highly recommend it. It works very nice. Let's see what else we have. Right click, and we look at Show in Viewer. Now this allows you to view this image in another window. And by default, it brings up this small window. And what we can do here is we can bring this window full screen just by clicking on the toggle button here. Now once you're in the external viewer, you can still right click and you have access to these functions. In the bottom left hand corner here, it shows you that you're in image 13 of 13 in that particular folder, and the path and the file name. Now if you'd like to bring this back to a smaller size, click on toggle. Now you can move this over to another monitor, and that allows you to toggle that again, and it'll go full screen on the other monitor. Now while it's full screen on the other monitor, you could still click on these different thumbnails you have here, and the thumbnail that you select will be shown here and in the viewer. Now the viewer really comes in handy if you're in a situation where you need to set up another monitor for having clients or someone else looking at your captured images as you capture them. So you may launch the viewer, drag it over to the other monitor, toggle it so it's full screen, and then your clients are able to look at that monitor instead of having to look here with all this other distracting information. Okay, I'm just going to close the viewer, and you can also bring this viewer up with a keystroke, and by default it's F on the keyboard. So I'm just going to press F, and there it launches it, and it closes it. Now these keystrokes can be set up under shortcuts, and if I scroll down here, I'll find that we have the image browser information. And IB stands for image browser, so here's the keystroke that we use for toggling. And we have keystrokes for different magnifications, but they're not set by default, so you could set these if you need to. And there's a separate tutorial video on how to set shortcuts. Now if you're also capturing movies, Your movies are also shown here, and it'll include a thumbnail of the first frame of when you started recording the video. And to be able to view the video here, you'll need to have Apple's QuickTime installed in your system, and you can just use the free version of QuickTime. Now, the image browser is really just a viewer, so you cannot edit your images or videos here. Okay, let's take a look at the histogram. And the histogram here is in the upper right-hand corner, and you can see as I move the mouse around the image that it is showing what the current value of the pixel that is under the cursor is on the histogram. So here in this light blue, it's showing right in the middle. If I was to go to an area here that's a bit more white, you can see it goes off to the right, which is a much higher luminance value. And by default here, you're looking at the luminance histogram. Now, if I wanted to look at the other channels, all you need to do is left click on the histogram display. So here I'm looking at luminance. If I left click, now I'm looking at the red channel. Click again, green channel. One more time, blue channel. And back to luminance. Now you can resize this as needed, or you can hide it. Let's take a look at the metadata that's displayed for these images. And in this particular image, we have EXIF data and IPTC metadata. Now, pretty well all images captured with a camera have EXIF data, and the IPTC data is quite often optional. But this program allows us to insert data into any of the IPTC fields. And I'll just quickly bring this up. We'll be having a separate tutorial video on using metadata. But if I go to the View menu and Metadata, here are the fields that correspond to these fields over here for the image. So I could type in the city or the copyright or any of these values here, and when I capture the next image, this data will be embedded into the image as IPTC data, and they'll show up here. Now, you can only read the data here. You cannot edit it after the image has already been captured. And if you're running out of room a little bit here, if you just left click on the header, it gets smaller. And the system will remember these settings, so next time you load it back up, these will be closed. I'm just going to open up EXIF and IPTC data again. Now the thumb strip shows JPEGs and Nikon and Canon RAW images. However, it will not show TIFF images. Some of the Nikon cameras can capture TIFF, but the image browser will not show those. You could still capture those images, but they're just not displayed here. So whenever I left click on one of the thumbnails, it loads it up as a preview, and then after several seconds loads the full image here with all the detail. Now instead of clicking here, you can also use the keyboard. So by default, you can use the right arrow key to advance by 1 and the left arrow key to back up. If you use the page down key, it goes forward, and page up goes backwards. And if you use end, it goes to the last image, and home goes to the first image. You can also, if you hold your mouse over this area, use your mouse wheel to go forwards and backwards in the thumb strip. Now let's take a look at some of the different things that we can do with the thumb strip. Now first of all, we can resize it. So if we wanted here, we can have lots of different data loaded into the thumb strip. It really depends on the workflow you're working on. So in this case, I wanted to see the thumbnail, the file name, and also the histogram. So if I wanted to, I could just hide the histogram completely and use the histograms we see down here. Now that's advantageous if you are quickly scrolling through a bunch of your captured images and want to maybe delete the ones that are obviously have poor exposure, or flag the ones that are maybe keepers. You can do it very quickly just through the thumb strip and its histogram function. So whenever you see a red dot here, that means that there is data that may indicate that it's underexposed. So it may be referring to the black here, and in this case, having this area underexposed may be just fine. It also indicates that there is an area that is overexposed, and it might be right here. And that is actually the spot, because if you look at the histogram in the upper right hand corner, it shows all 255s. But that may be okay as well, and may be desirable if you're using a high key scene. So let's see some of the different things that we can do with the thumb strip. If you right click on it, you can see here that we can flag it, and when you flag it, it inserts a little red bar up here, and that indicates that you wanted to flag this for some reason. Maybe it's a keeper, maybe it's one you wanted to throw away, or maybe one you wanted to come back to later. And you can flag more than one if you want. And to unflag it, just click on it, flag, flag, and so on. Now you can also print out some reports based on the images that you have here on this particular folder. So if I right click and go print and detail, it's going to bring up a report that shows me the different metadata and then the image itself. And I can go forward into different pages. You could tell it to fit. I could zoom in and out of this. And if you wanted to print one, all you need to do is click on print, select your printer, pick your page range if you like, or print it all, and send it off to the printer. Now you can also save it as a PDF. Let's try that. Okay, it's being saved. So I'll close this, close that, and I'm just going to bring up Windows Explorer. I'll just shortcut to it by going this way. And here's a PDF. So if you wanted to perhaps email a list of some image previews and as metadata to someone, using the PDF is a good way to go. And you can see this is a very large PDF. The embedded images in the PDF are really only the preview images. They're not the full-size image. Now if I right-click and select Print and List, it just shows us the individual thumbnails and the file names. And the same idea, you can print it or you can send it to a PDF. Okay, let's right-click again. Now we can also convert a particular thumbnail to high quality, and by default, whenever you add an image into ControlMyNikon, either by just clicking on a folder that already has images in it, or when you capture the image comes in at low quality. So the thumbnail is lower quality and the preview is lower quality, but the full-size image that's shown after several seconds is its regular high quality. And the reason the default is low quality is it just takes a lot of processing power on the computer to be able to crunch all this data to make a thumbnail and the preview. Now you can set that, if you have a really powerful computer, just go up to the Tools menu and the Preferences. And here under the Browser tab, you can tell it to create high quality images whenever you capture, or create them when you're scanning folders. And also by default here, you can see that there's one thumbnail creation thread. So it really doesn't make much of a difference if you're just capturing images one at a time. But if you are clicking on a folder that has many images already in it, you can increase the number of creation threads. And this refers to the threads that are run by the processor cores on your computer. So the computer I'm using has 8 cores, and I could set up one thread per core. So instead of using the 1 as a default, I could set that as 8. And now when I click on a folder that already has many images in it, the thumbnails will be generated very quickly. And it's very noticeably different than using one thread. But if you're not too sure how fast your computer is or how many cores it has, just leave it at one thread, and that's usually just fast enough. Now here we can see the location of the database, and the file name of the database is ttcrepository.ftb. Now these database files, and there's other database files at ControlMyNikon as well to hold the different profiles and languages and other settings. These all need to be in a particular place. It needs to be in a data folder. By default, it's in the same folder as where you installed ControlMyNikon. However, you can change it. You can go to location here and select a different folder, then shut down ControlMyNikon, go and move all the files over there, and then start up ControlMyNikon again, and then you now have completely moved the location where the database files are. It's really just your personal choice whether you want to keep it where ControlMyNikon initially installed it, or whether you want to move it off into maybe an SSD drive or maybe a dedicated image drive. If something were to happen to these database files, you will not lose your original images. They're not affected at all because your original images are always just stored in your folders. But the database holds additional information about those images, such as your metadata and these small images here in the histogram data. So after you've been using ControlMyNikon for a while, you might be capturing a lot of images, and then maybe outside of ControlMyNikon, maybe a Windows Explorer, you could be deleting images or folders full of images. Well, ControlMyNikon still thinks those are in the database. So what you can do here from time to time is just go click on the validate button, and when you validate, it's going to validate the thumbnail cache, and it's going to remove any information from the database for images that just are no longer on your computer. Okay, I'm going to set these back to low quality and close. So let's try deleting this image. So to delete it, you can right-click and select delete, or you can press the delete key on the keyboard. Ask, are we sure? Now, if we are sure and we want to delete it, it's going to be sent to the recycle bin, so we'll hit yes. Okay, it's deleted. Now let's see if we can find it in the recycle bin. Okay, here it is. So to restore it, you right-click and go restore. Then just go to another folder and back, and you can see it's being added back in. Now the date here, even though we just re-added it back in, is still the original date of the capture. And this is sorted by the date of capture, so the oldest image is on the left, the newest image is on the right. The next thing is synchronization. So right now, this thumb strip is synced with the folder. So if we were to capture an image, the image would automatically be added to the thumb strip, and it would become the current image, and the image would be displayed here. If we turn off synchronization, it's no longer synchronized. So we can capture an image, and although it'll be added to the thumb strip, it will not be selected as the current image. And that can be useful if you're capturing a large amount of images over time, such as on a time-lapse or maybe on a focus stack, and you just wanted to browse the images in the browser without being interrupted by new images that are being captured as time goes on. And when you want to re-enable synchronization, you just click here again and you put a check mark beside it. By default, normally though, you'd keep this synchronized. Now we can also browse to another folder. So I click on Browse, click on Images, and we see there's nothing in this folder. Click back here to Archive, and we're back at our Archive folder. So if we right click again and click on refresh, it will reprocess all of the thumbnails for this folder. Now on any image we can run a batch file. So this allows us to do post-processing after capture or post-processing on an image that's already in the database. So you may, for example, want to, as soon as you capture an image, rename it, move it to another folder where it undergoes some processing, and then move it over to another application that loads it up and maybe does some further processing. Using these batch files allows you to do that. And I'm referring to Windows batch files here, and these are kind of like the old DOS batch files that you used to have. And what you can do here under the Tools menu is go to Preferences, Miscellaneous, and here we can say auto launch batch file after we capture. We could select a batch file here, and the ControlMyNikon comes with just a sample batch file, and it's called export.bat. So now anytime we capture an image, this batch file will be run, and the file folder, file name, and file extension are sent as 3 separate parameters to this batch file. I'm just going to turn off this automatic part here. So if you right click on this and click on batch file, it will run the batch file and perform the processing. And just refer to the help file, and it will show you what parameters are used when you are using this batch file. Okay, let's right click again and take a look at configure. Now this is how we configure what data is shown here in the thumb strip. And by default it'll normally just show the thumbnail and the file name. It'll look just like this. But what we can do is add any of the data that is stored in the database to it. So let's say you also wanted to see the histogram and maybe the date it's captured and the dimensions, maybe aperture, shutter, and ISO, and the focal length, and that's it. Okay, so now of course it's not all going to fit, but we just resize it upwards and we could see that data. Now if I was to go back in and configure, we can change the ordering of that. So maybe I want to have the thumbnail first and followed by the histogram. Let's bring the file name down to the bottom. Now the type of data you show here is really going to depend on the workflow you're using. If you're using a batch workflow, you may want to show a lot of the different IPTC data fields because you are likely filling those in with your imported batch data. If you're shooting a focus stack, you might just want to see the image and maybe a histogram to ensure that the captured exposure is okay. If you were doing an HDR, you may want to take a look at what the shutter speed is, because you'll be able to see that the shutter speed changes every time an HDR image is captured. So it's really up to you what you prefer to have here. Now we can also filter out the file extensions. So you can display JPEGs and RAW images that have the .NEF or the Canon CR2 file extension, and also the .MOV file extension, which is used when you capture a video on your Nikon camera. But if I didn't want to see them all, I could just remove a check mark here and it'll filter them out. So here, let's take a look at JPEGs only, and I'll just uncheck those, click close, and these are the only JPEGs. And this is very useful if you are capturing images in the JPEG and RAW setting for your camera. So every time you capture an image, you get a JPEG and RAW of it. But it can be a pain to see both of those in your thumb strip. So if you just go right click and configure, you can set to see just one or the other. Now anytime you see a raw image displayed in a thumb strip, it is showing the embedded JPEG inside the RAW. If you were to take a look at one of these .nef files, you'll see there's a little block of data in there that shows a preview thumbnail that is being created by the camera body. And ControlMyNikon just pulls that information out and displays it. And it tends to be a fairly low quality JPEG. Any JPEG modifiers that you have active on the body will be reflected in it. So if you have the body set to create a black and white image, when you look at the NEF image, it's going to show black and white. But the actual image data inside the NEF image still has all the color information. So when you go to convert it into, so in post-processing, you'll find all your colors still there. But this embedded JPEG is still in black and white. So there you have it. That's how you use the image browser in ControlMyNikon. Happy tethering.